Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Happy Hour webcast from WhiskyCast.com. You can see my guest over here on the right side of the screen, the one, the only, Dennis Malcolm, celebrating his 60th anniversary in the Scotch Whisky business tomorrow. Good evening, Dennis. How are you tonight?
I'm fine, Mark. And you?
Oh, doing just great. Thank you for joining us. And Sláinte, happy anniversary. We'll talk about those 60 years over the course of the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. If you have questions for Dennis at home, feel free to post them in the chat rooms associated with this webcast. We also have Robin Cooper from Glen Grant standing by in the chat room, ready to answer any other questions as well. And we may drag him in here in a few minutes as well if there's something that neither one of us can tackle, or we just decide to have some fun with Robin. So let's have some fun now. Dennis, tell me, first of all, what 60 years means to you, this accomplishment tomorrow.
Well, 60 years to me is just another day in my life, because I feel that it hasn't been a job to me. It's just been a way of life. It's what I was born into, and I don't see it as a huge milestone in my life. Is just the way forward, you know.
But you started out when you were 15, at an age when today that probably wouldn't be allowed, right?
No, that's true. Maybe the reason for that was I wasn't very bright to go on to further education, so I decided to go into the distillery. But that's not exactly true. My father worked at Glen Grant, and my grandfather before that. And the owner at the time when I started was Douglas McKessick. And he said that if any employee had children who are about to leave school, boys or girls, there was an opportunity at the distillery, they would be considered. So that's how I started at the distillery. And I really wanted to be a cooper, you know.
Tell me about that first day on the job as an apprentice cooper.
The first day I'll never forget. You know, in these days you had to buy your overalls and your boots and your 3-foot roll and your tools of the trade, really. And I walked up to the distillery, to the cooperage, which was beside the boardroom. You've been at Glen Grant, Mark, so you'll know there's a little garden there. That's where the cooperage was. And there's these big double doors. And I knocked on the door, an outside door. I didn't know what to do. And there's a voice shouted, "Come in." So I pressed the latch, you know, it's an old-fashioned latch, and opened the door, closed the door, and slid gingerly behind the door and stood there at a row of faces looking at me, not speaking. But I had to wait for quite a while till the head cooper appeared to get me going. Yeah.
What is it about starting out as a cooper? Because I know that a lot of head distillers and distillery managers and people who have been in this business for years, like you, like Jim McHugh and others, all started out as coopers.
Yeah, it's a very hard working job. It's a very manual job. You know, there's no forklifts in these days. Everything to be lifted or pushed. And what drew me to the coopering was I wanted to do something with my hands, and I couldn't really understand why a cask could stay in that shape without any glue or anything holding it together. And it actually held in a liquid that was thinner than water. So it was a bit of nosiness on my part, wanting to know exactly how it was made.
Can you still raise a barrel if you had to?
Oh, sure, but much slower now. Much slower now. It's like swimming. You never forget how to do these things, you know. And at the end of the day, it's a craft, and you're proud of what you've made. And you had to be when I started, because the head cooper was a very approachable guy, a nice guy, but every cooper had to use their own mark. So when you made a cask or repaired a cask, you had to put your mark on it. And I've been in the cooperage working away years after, and the head cooper would walk in and say, "Go down to number 4 warehouse, section such and such, store such and such. One of your casks is leaking." Years later. So you made sure, Bucket, they were tight from day one.
So did you figure out what the secret was and why that liquid that's thinner than water could stay inside?
Yeah, I really wanted to know why it was like that, and it's all to do with the skill of building the cask, the angle of the staves, and the hoops that hold it tight together. You know yourself, and the flagging. So it's quite a unique vessel,
At the time, though, your father was also at Glen Grant, and your grandfather worked there as well. You're the third generation of your family at Glen Grant, right?
That's correct. My grandfather was employed by the son of the founder, the major, who took over the distillery in 1872 to 1931. He employed my grandfather, and Douglas McKessick, who took over the distillery in 1931. When the major died, employed my father and me. So we go back a good bit, 100 years or so. I think it was
you would have. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think it was 1919 that my grandfather started there. Yeah.
And what did they do at the distillery? And did they try to encourage you to do anything else but work there?
Well, they didn't encourage me to work here, but the village had 5 distilleries and 5 pubs, as I usually say, a nice balance to 1,500 people, And most people in the village actually worked in the distillery because it was very manual in these days. There was no mechanization of any sort, so everything had to be done by hand. So I think it was my destiny to go and work at Glen Grant, really,
So with the timing and everything, you would have known Byway, right?
Oh, sure. Byway came there in 1898, died in 1972. So Byway was quite a character. Yeah, he was. When the major died in 1931, he left instructions that the Byway would have rooms up in his mansion house, and his meals were paid every day. He's down in the Seafield, which is just at the end of the Glen Grant lane, the entrance lane. So his meals were paid for, and we looked after him if there's any problems with his flat, his fireplace, or anything like that. So the strange thing about him, he'd come down now and again when I was the brewer there and come into the door and to complain about his chimney blocked up and smoke coming into his room. So I said, "Oh, that's okay, Byway, we'll fix that. And would you like a dram?" And he says, no, thank you. I prefer gin." So I think living in a big mansion house with all the parties that go on, there's a lot of gin being drunk before dinner at night,
There are some folks who are complaining that we are getting some echoes, and I'm not sure where that's coming from. Let me take a quick look here, make sure it's not something I'm doing.
I have a remote mic on here, speaker on here. Will that be doing it?
Let's try that. Let's adjust that if you can.
I'll put it off. I'll put it off and see what that's like.
I don't think we can hear you, though, without that now, so I think we still need to have that. I think we do need to turn your microphone back on, Dennis.
That's it, back on?
Yes. And I think we're going to have to live with what we've got on there, so we will continue on with that. For people who aren't aware, or who think of Byway as the ghost that haunted Glen Rothes just up the hill, give us the whole backstory on Byway and how you came to know him.
Yeah, well, Byway was taken over as a small boy, 1898, by the major when he was away on one of his safaris to South Africa. Big game hunting, which was the end thing for the landed gentry at that time. And he came across a little African village that was on fire. There'd been a bit of a fight on, and they'd set fire to the houses and all the rest of it. And they found two little boys walking along the road and the track there. So James Grant took one of them home with him, and his friend took the other. And they called him Byway Makalanga. Now, we always say Byway is like because they found him by the way, and Makalanga is an area in Matabele land where they actually found him. So that is correct, you see. So Byway actually was brought up in Rothes, educated in Rothes, played for the Rothes Football Club, passionate about that. He fought in the war as well, and came back and was served as the Major's butler until the Major died. So he was quite a character, you know. He's well loved in the town, and everyone was very respectful of him. When he died, he left about £18.50, his entire wealth, and he left it to the football club because he was so passionate about it.
And anybody who wants to go into the story of how they basically found what they thought was his ghost haunting the folks at Glen Rothes, you can Google that and find that story. It's an interesting one. Let's talk about your progression from working with Byway, starting out as a cooper, all the way up to becoming manager at Glen Grant, because it didn't take that long, really, did it?
No, well, I was impatient when I was young as well, you know. I served my apprenticeship as a cooper from 61 to 66, and then I wanted to find out how the liquid was made that went into the casks. So I then served the next 6 years going through all the different processes, from the fireman to the tun room to the mash house. And then in 1972, I went into management as a production brewer and ran the distillery then when I was 26. It was fantastic in a way because I hadn't a lot of experience, but the guys that I'd worked with on shift had hundreds of years of experience, and I was just the wee boy, so they looked after me, you know, and kept me in the right road. So I think that was a big benefit for me. They had the knowledge, and I had the youth to get the work done.
We have a comment from our good friend Alan Winchester, just down the road from you.
Yeah.
It says, great to see you celebrating the milestone. Many thanks from Alan and the others for your support and guidance over the years. You actually ran the Glenlivet Distillery for a while after the owners of the Glenlivet and Glen Grant merged in '79, right?
That's correct. My first manager's job was 1979 when I moved up to Glenlivet at the age of 33. 34, and run it. But 79 was the year that Chivas or Seagram's had a sort of a takeover of Glen Grant, and they held on to. They didn't control it until 1983. There was a space of 4 years where they had a sort of cooling down period, and then they did it, you know. But young Mr. Winchester, as I call him, he is younger than me. He's been in the industry a long time too. He was actually working on shifts at Glen Grant with me or for me, and then he moved on and went up to Glenfarclas and then Aberlour, and then he took over running all the Chivas stills. So I stayed up at Glenlivet from 79 to 83, and then after the 4 years they could move us about. So the idea then was that if they moved the management between the Chivas 4 stills and the Glenlivet Distillers 5 stills, they would get a nice mix of people and experiences. So I was then moved back down to Glen Grant and Caperdonich. And Ernie Sherratt, who was the manager there then, he went over to carry out the warehousing operations at Keith. So I stayed there until 1992, when they asked me to look after the 9 distilleries, which included Glen Grant.
So how hard was it to get Alan to do the dirty work? How many drams did you have to offer him?
I didn't need to offer Alan any drams. Alan's like he's like an encyclopedia of distilleries and processes and distilleries for the whole of the industry, you know. He was the most passionate young man about whiskey that I've ever come across.
Next to you, of course.
Well, I think he's more passionate than I was, because when he went away, he said to me, he'd offered a job, and he says, "What should I do?" And I says, "I would snap somebody's hand off to go and get that job, you know, go and do it, you know." So He's a very, very competent young distiller.
You mentioned Caperdonich, and that was also known as Glen Grant 2 for a while. And Graham Fraser wants to know, what did you do at Caperdonich or Glen Grant 2? And Caperdonich sadly is gone now, but tell us about that part of the distillery across the road from the original Glen Grant.
Okay, it all started back in 1872 when the major took over from the founder. You know, it was when the last James Grant died then, and the son took over. He immediately the next year went and doubled the capacity of Glen Grant on site, and he continued in that vein. And in 1898, they wanted to increase production again, so they built Glen Grant number 2, where Caperdonich is, which is about 500 meters away from us. And they made the whiskey there and single malt and pumped it up to Glen Grant, mixed it both together and filled it into casks at Glen Grant with one filling store. And that was 1898. In 1901, it closed. Now, there was a world recession then, and that's the reason it closed. So it did not open again to 1965. Now, that was a long world recession. You know, so I think there's more to it than that. And I often used to ask myself, why did they not keep it going? Because they used the same management to run the distillery, 2 distilleries. They used the same water source. They used the same malted barley. They had wooden fermenters. They had the same Porteous mill. They had coal-fired stills. So why did they stop? My view is because Caperdonich single malt is different from Glen Grant. It was too big a difference. And the only thing that was different, Mark, was the shape of the stills, because everything else was the same. So it stayed that it operated from 1965, and it closed once or twice through to 2002, 2003, and closed for good.
And that site is where Forsyth's now has its big lot, right?
Yeah. Richard needed the room to expand, and he bought the distillery, you know, which was lovely in a way, because Campari were offered it back from Chivas, but we didn't see the need for it, because it wasn't, you know, to build another brand. They're trying to build Glen Grant and get Glen Grant more known, you know. So we decided not to use it because we didn't have a blend of our own, so we didn't need the liquid. And Richard needed more space, so Richard bought it, and I cheered as a wee dram, because the way it was sold was that if the person that bought it distilled with it, Glen Grant still had to supply the water for the process and for the cooling. So when Richard knocked it down and made a coppersmith out of it, we had another sort of 25% capacity of water for producing at Glen Grant.
Is there any truth to the rumor that the locals in Rothes had put some taps in that pipeline between Caperdonich and the distillery to sort of say, shall we say, divert some of the supply as it was being pumped up the hill?
Well, I'm not sure if I should answer this truthfully, because I'm still alive and working here, you know, and
the statute of limitations has long expired on any kind of violations.
Yeah, it's gone a long time ago. It's time barred now. But the pipe came down in the mid-70s, and to believe you me, our own engineers that worked at the distillery was George Scott and Ali Farker. They are taking it down, and there was numerous self-tapper screws in it, you know. So people had bored a little hole, waited till they were pumping whiskey up, got a wee dram, and then put the screw back in again. So it was maybe one of the best pipes in the village for a while, eh?
What other stories do you remember that you could talk about things like copper dogs and stuff like that?
Oh, gee whiz. I was almost
for those who don't know what a copper dog is,
oh gosh,
I have one here that I acquired at the Aberlour garage sale during Spirit of Speyside a few years ago at the like the Masons Hall or something. But copper tube, fishing line so it didn't soak in. You'd hide it inside your boiler suit, dip it into the cask, take the cork out, recork it, and you had a pretty good sized dram there. So this is what a copper dog is. And I'll leave it to you to go from there, Dennis.
Yeah, Mark, if that's your one, you know, you need to be really tall to have a copper dog that length to have it down your leg because it'd be hitting your knee. It was a way that people tended to take duty-free spirit from the casks way back then, and they were made from the tubes in a condenser because shell condensers have got inside them maybe up to 150-inch diameter copper tubes where the water's pumped through and the alcoholic vapors mingles with the cold water and condenses into a liquid. So when they get worn and you have to replace them, maybe after, depending on your capacity, maybe 10 years, say, you retube them or put in a new condenser. It's only worn thin up at the top where the vapor goes in. There's a lot of action there. So the coppersmiths would make these copper dogs and sold an old penny into the bottom of it to seal it. And the payment, it's just what I hear, remember, this is not what I do. The payment was that the coppersmith who made it got the first fill of it. That was a payment for the dog.
I won't ask if you had one of those.
But it doesn't happen now.
No, it doesn't happen. It's completely illegal, as is dramming, too. And we should explain what dramming was as well for those who are somewhat new to whiskey. But basically, it was legalized drinking of new make on the job.
Well, it's a bit like every other industry, you know. I suppose if you're working at Walkers or Bakers, they'd let you take some shortbread and eat it with your coffee or take a piece and taste it. And if you're working in a chocolate factory, you'd eat it until you didn't want to eat anymore. So the men used to get a taste, you know, a little dram now and again. And that was the culture right up until I think it was 1978 when the unions stepped in, when some of them had maybe made mistakes, too many mistakes, or had an accident of some sort. They started saying, well, you contributed by giving them alcohol so that they weren't fully in control of their senses to do that, you know. So the unions decided that this was not a good practice. So it was generally in the industry stopped then. And they were then, most companies would give them a bottle a month, a concession bottle a month to make up for taking away the drams, because some of the old guys who'd been working there for 50 years, like Jimmy Anderson, who'd been there for 50 odd years, he reckoned he'd in drams he'd drunk maybe a couple of butts in his lifetime, you know, and that's quite a lot.
Oh yeah, absolutely. A really good question here from, well, actually, a good comment from our friend Gavin Ryan Thompson. Dennis, he loved working with you during the Inter Whiskey Fair in Frankfurt at the end of 2013.
Wow.
And wants to know if you remember the sample you gave him of a Glen Grant 50-year-old for the birth of his first daughter the year after, because tomorrow on your 60th anniversary, his daughter Emma turns 7 years old.
Yeah.
And he still has some of that. And he's going to have a wee nip of it.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent. That Glen Grant 50-year-old had been there to celebrate my 50th celebrations, you know. So, gosh, he's kept it a long time, you know. Tell him that it doesn't get any better in the glass, you know, in the bottle. It doesn't mature anymore. Once it's out of there and into glass, I always say the best thing to do is get that cork out of there and get it emptied as quick as you can.
I'm betting that you're not going to like the next question, though, then, based on that, from Chris Ratcliffe, our pal in London. He wants to know your thoughts on the movement of whiskey into the premium market. Do you get surprised by the prices and the bottles that are now produced, and many of which will never be drunk? I imagine that's got to be almost criminal to you.
Yeah, I think some of these older whiskies do warrant a high price, but the collectors are hyping the price up more than it really should be, I think, at times. But if you've been bold enough to lay down whiskey for 50 and 60 years, at the end of the day, when you get this product, it's cost you a lot of money, you know, and I think they deserve to get a fair price for it. But whiskey, single malt, is for enjoying and drinking. It's not money for saving.
Tyrone Coty in Nova Scotia has a good question. When did you host your first visitors at the distillery, and when did you open the visitors center, first of all, and how has having it changed things at the distillery?
Oh, wow. Glen Grant opened a visitor centre in the early 80s, and we just took visitors in round the distillery as and when they came. And down below the boardroom, we turned the two offices, which was the excise office and Douglas McKessic's office, into a little reception there for the visitors. And we had some local ladies looking after it. So we've been doing a good few thousand a year. And it wasn't until sort of 2008 there when we revamped the coachman's house for the owner, and ended up getting around about between 18 and 20,000 visitors a year. And I think it's an excellent thing because people coming to the distillery are actually enjoying smelling, hearing the noises, speaking to the people, actually being on site and hands-on, basically seeing how it's made. I think they go away with a better idea of how the product they're drinking from that bottle was made. They actually speak to the operators on site who are making it, so that's good.
And it really is all about the people, isn't it? The whiskey is something that brings us all together, but I've seen you lead tours around the distillery and open up the Major's Cave up back behind the gardens with that dram hidden away back there. And I've seen the smile on your face when you're doing this, and it's almost like you still get a kick out of this after 60 years.
I certainly do, Mark. And if you come over, we'll do that again, because I always say to people, when you go up to the safe and have a dram there, if it's a 10-year-old, it's sold down in the visitor centre and down in the office, my office, and taste it up in the open air with the water from the stream and go and taste it again down in the office, it tastes differently. It's all about atmosphere and the people you're with when you're doing that. It's an experience.
Where is the most unusual place that you've had a dram of one of your whiskeys?
Oh, wow.
If we're talking about atmosphere, where was the most unusual atmosphere for you?
Well, the one that I like the most is up on the stream there at the safe, because it's out in the open air and it's different seasons. They've got different temperatures. Where it's a lovely warm day, it's cool in that rocky gorge, and in the winter time it's freezing cold. But the dram just warms you up. It's a wonderful warm glow, So I think that's the best place to be.
Let's see here. Gavin says that 50-year-old is nearly empty. He has 4 CLs left.
Yeah.
He took a wee nip when she was born, her first tooth, her first walk, and he has certainly enjoyed it, Dennis. So maybe he'll finish it off tomorrow on her 7th birthday.
Well, that'd be lovely. That'd be lovely. I'll be thinking about him, and I'll raise a toast to him then as well. Then, well, congratulations, Gavin.
And Crumpler agrees. Whiskey is for drinking, sharing, and making memories, not staring at bottles for Instagram bragging rights. Ben Marnick has a good question for you. How did Glen Grant become so successful in Italy? Because you sell 5- and 6-year-old whiskey over there that the rest of us never see, and it sells amazingly in Italy. In the U.S., the youngest we get is the 12, and which is what I'm drinking tonight, by the way. So let's talk about that first. How did Glen Grant become so popular in Italy? Besides the fact that Campari owns it.
Yeah, no, well, it was lovely when Campari bought it in 2006, because I respect them for doing that, because it was the biggest single malt in Italy at the time. And I remember back in the mid-70s, early 70s to mid-70s, it almost did 500,000 cases a year, It was huge. 5-year-old, and when you're so successful with a 5-year-old for Italy, it's sometimes a disadvantage because you don't have so much stocks left to lay down for older expressions, But that's the way of the world. But it was a guy called Armando Giovanetti who came over in 1960, I think it was, and met up with Douglas McKessick. And as far as I know, he wanted to distribute single malt in Italy, but he wanted it to be 5 years old. Now, to get a 5-year-old single malt at a high quality is costly, because you've got to use really good casks, And I think that was good for Glen Grant, because we only used the casks 3 times, Brand spanking new bourbons this year, fill them for 5 years for Italy, and then 5 years again, 5 years again, and 15 years old, that cask is out of the system. So that's a good base for all the rest of the expressions. So Armando, as far as I know, took a few cases in his car and headed off back home to Italy. And it grew and grew and grew. And Douglas McKessick's daughter married a young guy, Hugh Metcalf, and he became the export director, and really spent a lot of time in Italy supporting the brand and growing the brand. So all credit to him. He was the guy who really made Glen Grant big in Italy,
And from 5 to well over 50 years old, I have maintained for years that Glen Grant is great at 5, great at 12, 15, 18, but it really gets really good starting at about 28 to 30 years old, and just gets better and better as it gets older. What is the secret, other than just getting rid of all the casks that don't quite match up at that
Yeah,
age?
well, you never, if any of the casks are just slightly poorer in color or aroma when you're dumping the casks, we get rid of them for all the expressions, whether it's 5, 10, 12, 15, they don't go in. So quality control is quite strict that way. And we bottle everything on site ourselves, so we are capable of doing that. We don't dump by numbers. We're not dumping thousands of casks at a time. We're dumping a few hundred, so it's quite easy for us to do that. And Glen Grant's policy is fill the casks only 3 times, So we've always had very good quality wood. So I think that contributes to the quality of Glen Grant continuing to appreciate as the years go on. I'm on record for saying all single malts don't do that. They're like football players, They're excellent when they're in their late teens, early 20s, and when they get about mid-30s, they plateau off, and then they can't get any better. But Glen Grant never ceases to amaze me with the quality improvement as the years go on.
Well, the very first time we met was, I think, 2008 at Whiskey Live in Paris, and
Oh
you
yeah,
poured me some 50-year-old, sort of like that same dram that Gavin had,
yeah,
and it was stunning.
yeah.
And I've had more 50-year-old, I've had some 60-year-old Glen Grant, and it tastes just as vibrant and fruity and full of flavor as an 18-year-old does. And that's where I get this from, is that not a lot of whiskeys can mature that way on a consistent basis. But I've never had an old bottle of Glen Grant that I didn't like or
No,
love.
yeah. And the other thing I've always noticed when I'm selecting some of these old ones for doing things like that, you very seldom get any of them that are heavy on oakiness, There's not a woody or oakiness there. It's just in the background, very delicate, if anything at all.
I guess we should note at this point that there will be an anniversary bottling coming later this year. We can't say much about it, but how will you pick the whiskey that goes into this 60th anniversary bottling of yours?
Well, we have a look at a few of them just to make sure, Mark, that it's perfect in aroma and taste. I always say that aroma and taste have got to be in harmony all the time. So that's the first thing we'll do. And we'll make sure, Mark, that it's one that doesn't have, I don't like this woody or oakiness too much, too dominant, So we'll look for one that's not that in it.
Chris Ratcliffe wants to know what you learned from Robert McPherson and Hamish Proctor. Was the move up planned, and did you apprentice under them in your move up into management?
I worked with them all. Robert was the manager at Longmorn Distillery when I was running the 9 distilleries. And Robert, when I had holidays, I was looking after the 9 distilleries. Robert was my second in command there. He looked after them for me. He's an excellent distiller, and very good with people as well.
Kent Moore at South Arm Distillery wants you to talk a little bit about the Glen Grant stills and how the shape of those affects your new make.
Yeah, well, Glen Grant stills, every distillery's stills are all different. There's not two the same. They're all unique as far as I'm concerned. I've never seen two the same. But Glen Grants are fairly big and tall stills, so therefore the vapor has got a long way to go before it goes over to be condensed. So it's going to be the lighter vapors that go up high, and the heavier ones will reflux back inside the still. But in 1873, 74, when the young major took over, the son of the founder, he wanted to make Glen Grant, he wanted to be different. He wanted to make his mark on it. So he introduced purifiers, which are empty cylinders between the still neck and the condenser. You run cold water over the head of them to keep it a cold head. And when the light vapor came in from the boiling vapor came in from a still midway into purifier, light vapors rise. So the lighter ones rose to go over to be condensed with the condenser. But when they come up, they hit the cold head because the head was cooled with water. The heavier ones reflux back the purifier, back a little pipe into still, and only the lighter, purer ones went over to be condensed. So that made it lighter again, uniquely different.
Probably a good thing that we didn't have rules about traditional practices back then. I have a sneaking suspicion somebody in bureaucracy would not have liked that one.
No, I would say so too. But I mean, it's something that I would have never done myself because young Major Grant, he inherited the distillery, and usually when people inherit something, we usually say he gets bucket loads of money. He had train loads of money, and he made that vast change. And he had that much money, he didn't need to worry if in 10 years' time the spirit wasn't as good as the old make. He'd made 10 years production and it wasn't so good, but he had plenty of money anyway. So most distillers nowadays would be very careful at making changes, change, check, and try not to change at all.
And I guess we should explain the relationships or lack thereof between, say, Glen Grant, then the Grants over at William Grant and Sons down the road in Dufton, and the Grants over at Glenfarclas over on the other edge of Aberlour. Grant's a pretty common name in the Speyside region, isn't it?
It is indeed, and they're all very, very good distillers in their own right, And I could ask you a question now. What's the best Grant, Mark?
The one in front of me.
No, I wouldn't say that. It's a government grant because you don't have to pay it back.
You got me, Dennis. I didn't even think of that one. Well played.
You answered the question. One of the guides that I had many years ago from Dufton, and he had a pub up in Dufton. He was a guide, and he had about 30 people out in the courtyard, and he was giving them all their free drams, and he stood up on the steps and he said, "What's the best dram you've ever had?" And people were saying Glenfiddich, Glenfarclas, and he said, "No, it's the one in your hand because it's free."
Yep. But the next one.
But you're right. The Grants are a well-established name in the single malt industry.
Are there any family ties or connections, or is it just very distant, if any, relationships still?
Yeah, there's no
business relationships, but
business relationships. But Hugh Medcuff's Douglas McKessick's daughter, who's married to Hugh Medcuff, Kirsten Medcuff, she still stays over beside Forest, Milton Brodie there, and a Sarah Parsons, who was a granddaughter of the Major, who died in 1931, lives down in Essex. So I have been in touch with her a few times, especially when Chivas took over 1979, 83. When they bought the distillery, Mark, they just bought the distillery. They didn't buy the gardens or the stream or the water source. They just bought the group, the Glenlivet Distillers, because they were interested really in buying the Glenlivet. And I think maybe they got a little surprised when they found there's 4 other distilleries came with Glenlivet. But they ended up having to buy the garden and the stream and the water rights in the spring and everything from Sarah Parsons. So I had dealings with her then,
And it wasn't much long after that before you wound up at Balmenic for a while, one of your few times away from Glen Grant.
Yeah. It's when Pernod took over the Chivas group, that was 2000 or 1999, 2000. I was there as a VIP brand ambassador, just showing buyers, etc., and customers around 2 or 3 days a week, and that's not really what I've been doing all my life. I've been production, hands-on, and wanting to be involved. So I did that for about 6 months, and then a young guy called Graham Hutchin, who's the group operations director for Edrington now, he was the project manager with Chivas when I was running the distilleries, and then he moved to Allied, then moved up to Inverhouse. He was the general manager with Inverhouse, and he asked me to go up and run Balmenic. And he asked me a few times, and we had a lot of chats about it. And then I decided, yeah, I'll go. So I had a very difficult job writing a resignation letter, because that's the first time I ever had to do that, to Chivas and go up to Balmenic. And there was a couple of reasons. It was a manually operated distillery, 8 guys there, fully manually operated. And my wife's great grandmother was Jeannie McGregor, a daughter of the McGregor who built the distillery and opened the distillery. So it was kind of going back in the family ties there a little bit with my wife.
What was it like running it, and why did you go back to Glen Grant?
I was responsible for 9 distilleries, a gin distillery, and 3 farms when I was running a Chivas staff, and then I went from that to one single distillery, and it was maybe making 2 million plus a year. So it was more like a part-time job, but it was very, very, very enjoyable because everything was hand operated. So I liked sort of adding my sort of bits and pieces to it and changing little bits and pieces. So it was good. But then when Campari approached me to come back and run Glen Grant, it's a part of my heart, and I couldn't really say no to that, could I?
No.
Most of my life has been at Glen Grant.
Well, you were born on the property, right?
Yeah, I was born in 98 New Street, Rothes. There's a little bungalow there now, just at the entrance of the drive. I was born on site, and I live in the old manager's house now. I bought it in 1983. So I used to say I was born on site, but I don't want to die on site, but it looks like I might.
That's not going to be for a long time. And on that note, Faye Cool says her husband, Graham, who you know from Glen Murray and now at Dingle, wants to know how you keep your youthful looks, Dennis, because Graham needs tips.
Well, I could say to Faye or Graham that I'm not as super fit as them. They're out on bicycles and doing so many charity things and all the rest of it. But it's maybe she's getting confused with my hairstyle just now, because I haven't had a haircut since December last year.
Tyrone Cote wants you to tell us about the bottles that were worthy enough to make it to the shelf on the wall behind you. And we never did ask what you're drinking tonight. So what's in your glass? And then tell us what you picked for those bottles on the shelf.
Oh, wow. Well, what I've got on the top here on the shelf is that we've got the full range here. We've got the 10-year-old, we've got the 12-year-old, we've got the 15-year-old, we've got the 18-year-old, and we have a Cask Haven, which was first full bourbons and first full sherry casks just for GTR. So you won't see it anywhere. And the 15-year-old, which was first full bourbons, 15-year-old, non-chill filtered at 50% by volume. So that's a very nice one. And now we just went for GTR and America, but it looks like the company's going to open it up to everyone. I think that's a good move.
Love that, because yes, I appreciate travel retail, but with the pandemic and the way it's decimated travel, there's a lot of whiskeys that are sitting there that we don't get to try anymore.
Yeah, and it's a good shop window for everyone, the airports, but when they're not working, it's of no benefit to anyone. So I think it's for sharing. everyone should have the opportunity to try it,
And then what's in your glass tonight?
Well, I put in a little bit of Arboralis, which is a new one that we launched for Australia there last year to mark the 180 years of distilling. I think it's more in the like of Glen Grant way back in the 60s and 70s, because we used quite a bit of sherry then. So it's not just predominantly bourbon wood or remade hogsheads. There's quite a percentage of sherry there, which gives you that fruity, sweet raisin sultana notes to it. So it's quite nice. Quite nice.
Graham Fraser wants to know that, or says when he visited in 2001, he thought that the stills there were direct fired, but no longer. Has that changed the style of the whiskey?
No, what I can safely say to everyone is, the shape and style and the process, the parameters for making single malt Glen Grant has not changed in the last 60 years that I've been here. So I think that is testament to the DNA of Glen Grant staying the same for the next 60 years as well.
And Bill Ricker says one of his all-time favorites, and I've had a chance to taste this bottle, is a 54-year-old Gordon and MacPhail Glen Grant Sherry Bomb, as he puts it.
Yeah.
Tell me about the relationship that the distillery has with Gordon and MacPhail, because they've bottled some really old Glen Grants over the years under their own labels. And I know that they have deals with a number of distilleries to get new make filled into their barrels. How does that work from the distillery's end?
Well, the thing is, if you go way back with Gordon MacPhail, George Achert, who founded it, he was very friendly with Douglas McKessick, the last owner of Glen Grant, and Gordon and MacPhail were high quality grocers and importers of sherry and wines. And apparently, I don't know when they'd met, maybe at dinner or something, George Achert had been speaking with him and saying, look, I've got sherry butts and sherry hoggies and port pipes and things like that. I don't know what to do with them. So I think they did a deal and he took them up and filled them at Glen Grant. And that's been there since many, many years ago. So they have a small filling every year. But you're right, they do fill at almost every distillery and they lay it down for many, many years. And that's why you see them with so many really old, mature single malts from every distillery.
I hear tell that they had like something close to a 70-year-old that you were trying to get your hands on, the cask of that one a while back.
Yeah. They launched that last year. I think it was the year
Something
before
like
last.
that,
Yeah. But sometimes, Gordon MacPhail used very good casks as well. But you like to, if you're putting your name to it, you need to make sure that it's perfect. The aroma and the taste's got to be in complete harmony all the time.
Our pal Frank Scott in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, and that'll explain the genesis of this question. He wants your thoughts on the Bronfman family selling Seagrams and how it changed the industry, because you were part of the Seagrams empire back in those days.
That's correct. That's when Edgar Bronfman and Charles Bronfman in Canada. Charles was over in Canada and Edgar was over in America. But Charles didn't take too much to do with it. It was Edgar Senior who was running the whiskey empire, and then young Edgar, his son, took over. But I think he wanted to be a film star of some sort, because he took over Universal Vivendi Studios or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, he wanted to be into the film business, but and didn't really want to pursue that, So the company was sold, which is a shame in a way. But they started off and were very big, It was a shame. But the younger ones, you can't force them to go into it, because you said earlier on, it's people with passion that you need to make a product. And if your heart's not in it, you're not doing yourself any good, and you're not doing the brand any good.
And we should point out that your daughters did not choose to go into the family business. So what are they doing?
My daughter, I've got one daughter, and she retired 4 years ago. she became a policewoman. So, I mean, I'm not an illegal distiller, and she went legal. I was a legal distiller as well, but she went down the other route. She went into the police and spent all her life in the police, and now retired. And she's got two twin boys who are going to uni this year. So, and none of them want to go into the industry as such. So it'll just be left to me just now.
It's amazing the longevity that one has when your kid retires before you do. That's just stunning. Chris Radcliffe, a great question here, because you can speak to this probably better than anyone. Does a fully manual distillery run by the skill of the workers make a better spirit than more automated distilleries run by fewer people? And is there a benefit to technology? My take is that you get more consistent spirit, but it's not necessarily better spirit.
Yeah, I was brought up on manual operation. The first forklift came in about 1965 or 7 or something like that. We had to push all the cars until then. And I remember doing long division sums in the filling store. We didn't have a calculator. You had to divide out to see how much proof gallons was in each cask. But automation is a great tool for us to use, because once you set the process parameters, temperatures, flows, etc., and feed it into that computer, it checks every millisecond. So you have consistent quality, consistent cuts for your new spirit. Everything is much more consistent. So, and the guys who come and run the distilleries now, I feel sorry for them in a way, because they go into a control room, and they're very good at computers, but I mean, they've got to learn the whole process as quickly as possible. Whereby in my time, you'd have a few years in the stills, a few years in the turn room, a few years in the mash house, and a few years in the warehousing before you actually became competent. But nowadays, the skill is all these computers controlling and keeping your product consistent.
What do you think your father and grandfather would say if they had to walk into a still room today and see all those computers?
They'd possibly wonder what was going wrong with the place. It's like you walk in and there's only one person there, and if he's in the canteen having his break, there's nobody there at all. But they've got these information little things that, like bleepers that they carry about with them. They know exactly what's happening all the time. They're really switched on, these operators now.
Let's see here. Graham Fraser has another question. A lot of the Glen Grant used to go into Chivas blends for obvious reasons. Is it all bottled as single malts now? Because, as you've pointed out, Campari does not have a blended brand. What percentage goes to blending stock, or are you bottling everything from Glen Grant as a single malt?
We bottle everything. Since 2013, we invested, Campari invested in a bottling hall at Glen Grant, so we bottle everything on site since 2013, which gives us control, and it gives us, if you're depending on a third party, which we had to do for many years, if they have a problem with deliveries of labels or cartons or containers, you've got a problem and you don't know it. You're better to be on hands-on yourself, and I think it's fantastic for the quality. Glen Grant bottles everything for itself now.
So all of your 100% of your production goes for single malt. You're not selling anything to blenders.
There's a very small percentage for some sort of reciprocal deals, because Glen Grant does have a blend. When they bought the company from Pernod, they bought Glen Grant and Old Smuggler, which is a blend. So it's an allied blend, so it's still there, So
I did not know that Old Smuggler was part of Campari now.
Yeah.
I am going to have to try that.
Yeah, that's what they do. Many years ago, they were looking for an Old Smuggler 12 to sort of compete with everyone else, like Chivas Regal and all the rest of them. So I went about for quite a while and created a 12. And then when you were going to try and buy the liquid that you're wanting from different distilleries, everyone was needing their own stocks for laying down because there was quite a boom on then. So that basically hit the dust early on. We just did one batch. That was it. But we're a single malt distiller at the moment.
We have a comment that just came in about family ties. I think it's your daughter, Glenda, who says, I think she worked harder in her 30 years than you did at the distillery in 60.
Well, I'll refrain from commenting that, Mark. But the thing is, delegation is the way to keep going. You need to nurture all that young, energetic people. Because the young ones are hungry for information. They want to do things, and to believe it or not, if you go away, they'll want to do it better than you to prove to you that they can do it. So the secret in good management is to delegate to your staff, give them control, and let them take ownership of it.
Graham has another good question. Do you still have personal favorite casks maturing in the warehouses? Do you have some that are marked, don't touch this one without checking with me?
No, there is a few. There is a few there that there's quite a selection of different caskets you want to keep for quite a while, so that you can check. I always say to people as well, if I had my life to live over again, I would be doing something like laying down a percentage of different casks and then mixing them all together, different types, all the same age, when they're 10-year-old, when they're 15-year-old, when they're 20-year-old, and see how that worked, And then you had the maturation journey of that one cask in a way, if you had one cask.
This is a great question, and I'd never even thought of this one from Crump Crumpler. Since Campari owns both Glen Grant and Wild Turkey, have you spent any time at all with Jimmy or Eddie Russell?
Yeah. I was down in London a couple of years ago with Eddie and Joy Spence from Appleton Rum, and the company bought Grand Marnier, so we had the master blender from Grand Marnier there as well. And I did a tour a good few years ago of the States, from one side to the other. Ronnie Cox was there, and old Jimmy Russell was there for a week with us as well. And we just did all the speakeasy from one side of the country to the other, which was sort of meet the masters, just like we were doing, chatting and speaking. It was nice, And I've been to a few shows with Eddie as well. See.
Got any good tales from after those conversations, sitting around the bar having a couple of drinks?
Yeah, I've got one about Jimmy Russell, old Jimmy. I think I think his favourite is 101. And I always say that's the one with the most character and this defines Wild Turkey. But they've got so many other expressions, and Eddie with his long branch and stuff like that. So we were doing this tour, and we went back to the hotel, and old Jimmy says, "Let's go for a nightcap." See, so I says, "Okay." So he orders up to Wild Turkey's 101, or for everyone really, and that was great. And then I went and ordered Glen Grant, and the old guy said to me, he says, "I don't touch nothing but turkey." He says, "I don't want your Glen Grant." He wouldn't drink it. He's certainly a bourbon turkey man, I can tell you.
Wow. That's one where I would have loved to have had a recorder in the room listening to you guys talk, because that must have been fantastic just to hear the two of you, hear all of you just conversing, because Joy's wonderful at Appleton as well.
Yeah,
I've had the chance to meet her a couple of times in the past, although we don't do much rum coverage around here. But just to be able to hear those stories, that's what makes this so much fun.
It is. It's all about people, It's all about people, and people say what makes single malt. It's a good barley, it's a good water, it's good distillation, it's good processes. Something they miss out the most important ingredient. That's people.
And since Robin says this was a memorable tour, I'm going to unmute you, Robin. Just you're muted yourself. Please unmute yourself. Tell us about this tour.
Gosh, I think it was back in 2012, 2013.
Could be.
At the time, we had Yummers, we had the Suntory brands, we had Tullamore Dew, we had Glen Rothes, we had Auchentoshan, we had Bowmore, Glen Geary, Cutty Sark. And so we decided to embark on a 7-city tour around the United States, just to really speak to bartenders and retail staff, just to, tell stories and get them to have a sip. But it was incredible. I mean, the stamina of Dennis and Jimmy and was absolutely amazing because, 7 cities in 2 weeks, it was like a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
So Dennis, I mean, in fact, I don't know if you remember this, Dan, but this is a barrel stave, which there's Eddie's signature there. That's you here.
Yeah. Mike Miyamoto.
Mike Miyamoto, yeah, from Yamazaki was here.
Yeah.
The young guy from Auchentoshan Distillery, Jeremy.
Mm-hmm.
You were teaching him lots
right
from New York to Boston for about 2 hours. You were telling him every which way to save money on production. Myself and James were sitting behind the pair of you, and we were crying with laughter because it was so you, Dennis. You're such a great mentor. You're such a great teacher. But you were teaching this young guy. You were giving him a lot of the benefit of your own experience, which was absolutely wonderful. Kind of man you are.
It's important, Robin, because the young guy who runs Glen Grant now, you know Greg Stables,
Of course, yes.
When he only ever came and asked me a question when he was completely stuck, and maybe some odd problem, and I'd say, "Have you tried this?" And he said, "Yes, tried that." And then before I'd say any more, and he says, "We've tried this, we've tried that, we've tried the next thing." He was actually thinking the same way as me, So I think that's fantastic when you get people who really want to take control and check out everything themselves. That's taking ownership.
You famously said in an interview that I watched recently you'd said there's actually 4 ingredients: water, barley, yeast, but the 4th one is passionate people, and
right.
You're a very passionate person. That's what this makes this industry so fun to be a part of. It's the passion, it's the people.
Yeah, and it's a really nice industry to be in because, everyone in the industry, it doesn't matter what company you're with, Diageo, William Grant, Glenfarclas, Glenmorangie. If I've had a problem at Glen Grant and say the mill motor broke, that's one of the hearts of the distillery. When it breaks, you can't do anything. You just phone up all these people in the industry and say, "I've got a motor here, it's burned out and I can't work." Do you know something? They'll actually say, "We've got one." They'll come and they'll pop it in for you, and then you just go and buy a new motor and give them it back. It's a fantastic. It's one huge big family, really.
Mm-hmm.
Until the marketing guys get involved, and then it becomes business again, right?
Yeah, when it gets sales, yeah. But that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Robin, do you have any other good stories about working with Dennis all these years?
Gosh, I tell you one story that comes to mind actually, because Dennis is always playing jokes on people, which is one of his qualities. He's mischievous.
Behind that innocent face lies the heart of a prankster, right?
It was a mutual friend of ours who had a connection in the Northampton cobbling business, shoemaker, and he had given me a ring and he said, "Look, I can get you this wonderful pair of shoes at half price." And I said, "Look, go for it. I'll pay you the money when I see you at the distillery." So I came over with a couple of weeks later with a group of American salespeople, and we were in the coffee shop, and I said, Robin, I've got you something." And he produced a box. I thought, "Oh, my shoes." So I opened the box, and it was an old pair of Dennis's work shoes. And the whole group of people were kind of rolling around, slapping their thighs. It was so funny. And of course, I already handed over the check, and I was like, where are my shoes? Where are my shoes? Well, prankster here he had kept my shoes. He had switched them out. My shoes were in the office, but it was.
To be honest, they were never used. I never used them.
I was smelling them, making sure.
It was.
Question from Graham Fraser, and we'll close on this one. Any remaining ambitions for Glen Grant? I have one question after that, but any remaining ambitions?
2 words. World domination. I'd love to see Glen Grant in every market in the world. Let everyone taste it and decide for themselves if they really like it or not, you know.
And my last question is, after 60 years, what do you want your legacy to be when they write the history of the last century of Scotch whiskey, 50, 100 years from now? What do you want the chapter on Dennis Malcolm to be?
Wow. Maybe just...
There's going to be one.
Well, be consistent quality. And I tend to say to people, you know, what I'm doing now, laying down new spirit into first-fall sherry butts and hoggies and barrels, select good wood, and then in 20, 30, 40 years' time, when it becomes fully matured and bottled, it's as good as it'll ever be, and it's as good as is now, because I depended on my predecessors to do the job right for me, you know. I'm only carrying on that journey for them, you know. So I want to see the journey carrying on.
And on that, happy anniversary, Dennis, my friend.
Happy
It's been too long since we've
Ben.
seen each other, and I can't wait to get together with you as soon as we can all be together again.
Cheers,
Sláinte, my
Mark.
friend.
You're very welcome.
Happy anniversary, Den. You're a legend. Legend in this industry. Congratulations.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for spending time with us. I know it's late over there, and I really appreciate your giving us your time tonight. And enjoy your anniversary this weekend. Anything special planned?
No, maybe I'll maybe have a little walk up the garden to see what like the garden is, you know, when it's a wee while since I've been in there because of the lockdown carry on, you know. So we'll have a wee look at that.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for watching tonight. For Dennis Malcolm, for Robin Cooper, I'm Mark Gillespie. Don't forget to listen to the podcast this weekend, and join us next Friday night for the Happy Hour live webcast from WhiskyCast. Once again, good night, Sláinte. Take care of yourselves, wear your masks, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, Mark. Thank you.